and welcome to Coming to New England. My name is Maya Jagir, and I am here with my guest, who is my mom, Shelley. Thank you, Shelley, for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So, can you tell us what your full name is?
Shelley Havemeyer.
All right, that's awesome. And when and where were you born?
I was born in 1954 in New York City at Manhattan Women's Hospital.
And how did your family come to live there?
Well, my dad was born and raised in New York City. His parents were German immigrants. And my mother was born and raised in Canada, had a relative who had moved down to New York. And she decided she wanted to come and attend Traphagen School of Fashion Design, which is now known as Parsons. And while she was there, she met my dad.
That's really cool. So when you were in school, were there any sports or activities that you were involved in?
Sports, not so much, although I did some. I was never part of a swim team. I love swimming. I wasn't part of a swim team, racing swimming, but I did what we called then water ballet, which they now call synchronized swimming. I did that for years, not with part of the school. It was an outside activity that I enjoyed. And I also did, what my main focus aside from classwork was theater. I did a lot of amateur theater through school and after school as well.
That's really, really cool. I know I've enjoyed theater too, so I'm glad that we have that in common. So, back to your family. What stories have been passed down to you about your ancestors and your older relatives?
Well, several come to mind. One was when I was very young, a very important story that was told to us many times. I mean, we don't talk about it now really at all, but when I was young, we were reminded that my dad's father, when he was growing up, and that was also in New York, after they had moved here from Germany, and they belonged to a large Lutheran church, and several Lutheran churches at that time, now we're talking early 1900s, had set up a Sunday afternoon event, an excursion on a boat on the Hudson River. And at that time, kids are usually taught to swim today, but they weren't then. And it was a Sunday afternoon event, as I said, and the boat caught on fire. Somehow there was a fire, and people were afraid, and then it started to sink, and they were trampling each other and jumping into the river. Most of them couldn't swim. So all 12 to 1,300 people died, and my grandfather's mother, so my great-grandmother, and two siblings died in that event. And actually, I didn't know until I was looking this up, some years back when I realized you could get so much information on the internet. And it's mentioned that this was the largest disaster in New York, and this was in 1904, up until the time of the September 11th. There were more people lost in the Slocum, it was the General Slocum disaster, until, as I said, September 11th. Also, there was another branch of the family that came over from Germany a little earlier, and these would have been like great-great-uncles, or great-great-great-uncles. And they started a sugar refining business in New York, and it became the largest sugar refining business in the country, owned by the Havemeyers. And then when they became very, very wealthy, they started a large art collection. They became known as art collectors. And as a kid, we loved to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I've taken you there several times. And there are a lot of paintings there from the Havemeyer collection. That's kind of cool.
On to another topic. How did you choose your child's name?
Well, as I mentioned to my friend from Switzerland, actually, she was, to me, a very special person. She was a very free spirit. She was very tall, willowy, and a kind, compassionate person, but also she traveled her own path. And I decided at that time, if I ever had a daughter, I would name her after my friend Maya. And that's why it's spelled with a J, because of her German heritage, too, and ours as well.
That's kind of cool that she also had a German heritage as well as what we have. So, continuing to speak of your daughter, what is the proudest moment you can think of being a parent?
Well, there are many proud moments. In our church, we were very involved in our church, very active in our church, and once a year the youth would put on the Youth Sunday. They would run the entire service. And I remember the time that you gave the sermon, and you just did such a fabulous job. And afterwards, everybody kept coming up and congratulating not only you, but me about what a wonderful job you had done. I remember that clearly.
Yeah, I remember that too. Those were some good times. So, getting back to you, what is the most exciting thing that you have done in your lifetime?
Well, I've made several big moves, and I've done a lot of traveling. But one thing stands out in particular. When I was traveling, this one particular time, we had, as I mentioned, a number of exchange students from foreign countries, and one was from Morocco. And I had arranged to go down and visit her family. Her name was Wafa Ryan. And her mother was a broadcaster in Rabat, and she also did some acting. And at any rate, she was going to be in a movie. She was the star of this film, and they needed an English-speaking female. And they said, how would you like to be in the movie? So I made a film in Morocco. So that's something a little unusual.
That is really exciting. I know, I remember having heard that, and I used to tell my friends that all the time, that my mom was in a movie in Morocco.
I'll tell you, I'd be a little nervous to go over to Morocco today, but then didn't think about it at all.
Yeah, that's true. So, continuing on about life and the world, how do you see that the world is different today than it was when you were growing up?
I think the major difference, obviously, worldwide, the terrorism issue is something that did not exist when I was younger. So that has been a big change, of course, internationally. But looking at our culture within this country, I would say the biggest change is the divisiveness that we see in the culture today that didn't exist, not to say it didn't exist at all, but not the way that it does or as prevalent as it is today. And also, people seem less willing to agree to disagree. They're angry about their points of view, and they take a stance. You're right, I'm right, you're wrong, instead of trying to understand and appreciate each other's point of view. And less civility overall, I would say. So that's the change that I see within this culture.
I agree. I can see that. Not that I was around when you were a kid, but I can see through the past and the history. So, continuing on about history and events that have happened and are happening, what world events affected you and maybe your family while you were growing up?
Well, I wouldn't say anything affected us intimately and dramatically, but of course we were affected by them in more subtle ways. My father had been in the Army of Occupation in Japan at the end of World War II. And because of that, he was interested in the culture. Despite all the fighting that had gone on, he really appreciated the Japanese culture. So he spent time getting to know many people there and maintained those friendships his entire life, still has these friendships. And, another thing that I just stayed with me when I heard the story, although it may have affected me in ways I don't realize, was the Jonestown giant massacre, suicide in Guyana, where the American Jim Jones had gone down with all these followers of his. And I remember seeing the news broadcast, and it was like I'd been punched in the gut that over 900 people had committed suicide drinking cyanide-laden Kool-Aid. I never forgot that. Horrifying. So those are the things that come to mind.
That does sound very, very horrifying. But let's bring it to a happier note.
Okay, yes, let's.
How would you define the American dream?
To me, the American dream is that no matter where you are born, or no matter where you live within this country, or no matter what your economic status that you're born into, that with an education, working hard for an education, and just working hard in general, you can take yourself to wherever you want to go. And success in life is you define success. I remember years ago I had friends who were a couple from Russia. And of course they had left Russia before the USSR broke up, so this is a long time ago. But I remember them saying the toughest thing they found in this country, living in this country, was learning to make decisions. Because when they were in Russia, they were told what to do and where to do it and when to do it. And here we have the freedom to do what we want, when we want, and where we want.
I agree. Well, thank you. It has been my pleasure to interview you today. Thank you
It's been
again
fun to
for
be here.
being here. Yes. This is Maya Jagir, and I hope you've been watching and had a good time coming to New England.